This is the MSI G274QPX 27-inch 1440p monitor, and I've been absolutely blown away at how much value I've got out of this display. I picked this up as part of a budget PC gaming build, expecting it to do pretty well given the price. This is listed at $349, and you've got a 240Hz refresh rate and great color accuracy, but after I actually put it through the paces, it seems like MSI was being somewhat modest with their specs, and I think this might be one of the best monitors that you can buy in this price range. Today, I want to dig into this a little more because it's rare that you find a monitor that not only lives up to the advertised specs, but surpasses them. And in this price range, I think it's worth considering for anyone looking for a sub $500 gaming monitor. So if that's you, or you're just curious about all the details surrounding this one, stick around and let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. When it comes to monitors, what you see versus what you get are often two very different things, and usually that lends itself towards getting something that doesn't quite live up to what's described on a spec sheet or in the marketing material. That can be caused from a variety of different factors. It could be that the specs given have been tested in ideal conditions and don't really reflect real-world use. There can be variability in manufacturing processes, different testing standards, and so on. But every now and then you find products that are actually better than what they're being listed at, and this MSI monitor is one of them. I was initially drawn to the G274QPX because of the design. Unlike some other gaming monitors, this has a sleek, minimal look to it without any overly aggressive elements. I'm just not really a fan of the big, bulky edges and notches that some of these have, but this has clean edges, thin bezels, and the stand I would say is a little bit on the thick side, but it's also one of my favorite things about it. I prefer single leg stands over the tripod style ones that you often see on gaming monitors because they generally take up less space, and if you want to put them on a shelf or a riser, they're a little easier to manage, but this one in particular has some great features outside of that. This has height, tilt, pivot, and swivel adjustments. It's pretty rare that you see all four of those on a monitor at this price point. And for a single column, it's quite sturdy and it doesn't jiggle or wobble around at all at my desk. If stands aren't your thing and you've got a monitor arm that you'd like to use, this is 75 by 75mm VESA compatible. So there's a variety of different options in how you can mount it, but for myself, I'm just happy using the stand. Now, the general aesthetic and build quality are great, but what really sets this display apart, in my opinion, is the most important part of any monitor, the panel. The G274QPX has a 27-inch 1440p panel with a refresh rate up to 240Hz. 1 millisecond response time, is G-Sync and Display HDR 400 certified, which at this price is pretty great, but it gets even better when it comes to some other specs. MSI lists this as having 400 nits peak brightness with a contrast ratio of 1000:1 and outstanding color accuracy covering 98% of the DCI-P3 color gamut. And in my own testing, I was shocked at the results. Out of the gate, without any adjustments, I got 96% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, which might seem bad or worse to some extent, but for a monitor that I've done zero correction on, this is far better than I'd normally see on almost any display. And the contrast and brightness specs blew the listed ones out of the water with 451 nits peak brightness, with a contrast ratio of up to 1740:1, which for an IPS panel is amazing. I was buying this just under the impression that it was going to be 1000:1, which is generally pretty good for an IPS. But anything above 1200:1 is somewhat rare, and this might actually be the best that I've seen outside of the IPS black displays made by LG. So this thing is punching way above its weight class in that regard. On the flip side of this, if you were to look at a VA panel, you'd likely see somewhere in the neighborhood of 3000:1 contrast ratios, but they often suffer from ghosting or black smearing, which this IPS panel doesn't have. And it also has great viewing angles, which is something else that VA panels tend to struggle with. Not only that, but uniformity is great with no backlight bleed, and the picture is fantastic. When I'm watching content, everything looks outstanding with good detail in the highlights and the shadows. Obviously, this is not going to be as sharp as a 4K, but at 1440p, I don't notice a huge drop in quality, and any streaming apps or media that I've tried look great on here. When you get into gaming, that's where this monitor really shines through, especially when you take advantage of that 240Hz refresh rate. It keeps everything super smooth, but just be aware that in a lot of cases, you're gonna need a pretty powerful GPU to run things effectively. I have an RTX 4070 in my PC, and I'd say that that is probably the bare minimum that you'd want to output to the full 240 Hz, but that, combined with a 1 millisecond response time, pushes out results that are noticeably better than running at 60 or 120 Hz. Anytime you're playing a game where you're moving around a lot, everything feels much more fluid, and I just find that it improves the overall feel of first-person shooters, RPGs, and sports games for that matter. If you'd rather use a console over a PC, you'll be limited to 120 Hz on both the Xbox Series X and PS5 due to the limitations on the consoles themselves. The PS5 has no trouble with this monitor running 1440p at 120 Hz, but the Xbox seems to only want to use 120 Hz at 1080p. 1440p works at 60 Hz, so that's something that you'll want to be aware of if you're planning on using an Xbox with this, but that and the HDMI specs on the monitor were something that I was a little bit disappointed with. On the back of this monitor, you've got two HDMI 2.0 ports, one DisplayPort 1.4, and a USB-C port that also utilizes DisplayPort with 65 watts power delivery. I would have liked if those HDMI ports were version 2.1 because the bandwidth at 2.0 only goes up to 18 gigabits per second. That limits you to a 144 Hz refresh rate at 1440p, where 2.1 would give you the full 240. It's not a huge issue, I just don't like the idea of not being able to get the most out of this monitor on the ports provided, but I also realize that it would likely drive up the cost on this, so you'll just want to make sure that you're either connected through DisplayPort or USB-C if you want to get the most out of the G274QPX. As I said, the USB-C port does have 65 watts power delivery, so it will not only act as a display input, but it will also power your laptop, provided that it does have USB-C charging available. If you're wondering if 65 watts power is enough, any modern MacBook will charge at 65 watts no problem. And I'd say the only time that it might not be sufficient is with power-hungry gaming laptops while gaming, where normally I would like to see at least 80 watts power delivery, but again, at this price point, it's still nice that it's even available on here. Beyond that, you still have some other good gaming features. There's night vision available if you'd like to enhance the dark scenes in games so they're a little bit more viewable, which seems to work decent enough. There's gaming crosshairs if you're playing FPS games, which is pretty standard on gaming monitors these days. And you've got anti-flicker features to reduce eye strain and fatigue over long periods of time. You can turn on all that stuff within the menu that's controlled with the joystick on the right back side of the monitor. And there's not a ton of manual adjustments that you can do outside of those, especially as it relates to the picture, but I'm not sure that there's really much else I'd need to adjust if I'm being completely honest. The picture on this thing is fantastic, and that combined with the 240 Hz refresh rate and 1 millisecond response time is a bargain for $349. I wasn't even planning on making a video about this monitor, but I've honestly just been really impressed with it, and because this is released just under a year ago, I suspect that you'll be able to find some pretty good deals on this going forward. So if you're looking for something affordable and you're good with the 1440p resolution, this is definitely something worth considering in my opinion. That being said, if you guys have any other suggestions for similar monitors in this price range that you love, let me know in the comments down below, along with any questions that you might have. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content, or help me design a coffee maker that serenades you with morning affirmations as it brews, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.